Welcome back to Conversation from the Crossroads of Southern Music History and Culture. I'm Dr. Bob Beatty and excited to bring you this episode with Brian Joyner, who has been a friend for about a decade now. He's a historian, has worked in historic sites, also has a fascinating side hustle that is a part of what I would call Earth School for sure. It was called Be Better Guys. You'll hear all about that here. You're also going to hear a fantastic history of go-go music. And if you remember the episode with Richard Josie, Richard talked a little bit about go-go music as well. And finally, we get into some nitty-gritty detail about music and the civil rights movement, specifically talking about the Albany, Georgia movement and how while history doesn't change, our interpretations do. And we discuss how Brian helped me reinterpret the success of the Albany movement, which was known as not a success for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference when they went to Albany, which led to them to go to Birmingham, bring another episode in with Ahmad Ward from a while back. Here's me and Brian chopping it up. Conversation went pretty wide. We got that Southern music history and culture in there. Brian Joyner, enjoy.
Yes, Be Better Guys podcast idea.
Continue, please. Me and a buddy of mine, David Boris, he and I used to have this website, bebetterguys.com. And for a while, another mutual friend of ours from back when I used to wait tables in Adams Morgan in Washington, D.C., she actually... Real quick, fun story. So we're all waiting tables together. Everyone thinks they're going to do something creative and run off and be, huge stars doing stuff. The movie True Lies is filming in Washington, D.C. with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis. She winds up getting some day work, doing production work. They invite her to travel with them for the rest of the shooting. And she winds up moving out to LA and having a career working in the entertainment industry.
She made it.
She made it. So fast forward, several years, and I hadn't talked to Mandy in a while. And it was one of those, I was talking to so-and-so, and so-and-so and I were talking. They mentioned you were doing this thing, and I went on the website and looked at it. This is kind of cool. What would be great is, what do you think about doing something called Be Better Guys Radio, where you and David get on, I play the host, we pick some topics, we get some things, 30 minutes in and out, right? So we did that for a while during Be Better Guys. It was the really early days of websites really looking to diversify their content. So we had Be Better Guys Radio. We started shooting some really interesting video, some of which actually turned out pretty good. Some of it looks like me with a handheld and with all the production quality you can expect from that.
Yeah.
So move forward another couple of years. Mandy comes back around. She's like, hey, we should try to read that up. So I went and bought the mic, right? So we start trying to do it. We're using Odyssey to do record, so we get these huge ass files that are now sitting on my laptop or sitting on the server somewhere. So when you mentioned, hey, let's get together, let's do this, I was like, wait a minute, I actually have equipment this time. Now I can't, my camera on my laptop is what it is, but this is not bad. So,
yeah, websites, and then eventually, the social media. We all put our stuff on we would move ourselves onto the social media platforms, and then those social media platforms would decide, you know what, I'm not going to show you to people anymore. Sorry. That's actually happened to me several different times over my lifetime in social media. So what happened to Be Better Guys? Did you get too involved in being better guys then be able to do this little side hustle for S&Gs?
So the fun thing with Be Better Guys, the whole story is David and I used to wait tables during the summer. I was at University of Maryland at the time. He was at University of Michigan. We met working in Georgetown at Hula Hands, the restaurant chain. And one of the things that really kind of bonded us, we're both from the DC area. But he was a baseball kid, went to school out in Montgomery County. I grew up in Prince George's County primarily. But we really like clothes, and we like, GQ and Esquire and like the whole thing. I have a brother who's about 8 years older than I am, and he was a clothes horse, and my dad was an attorney, so he always wore suits. So like being able to represent yourself with the clothing you wore was always very important to them, and therefore became very important to me. So sometime around 15, 16 years old, I start, grabbing the GQ from my brother when he's done with it. And eventually I get my own subscription and Esquire, and magazines. One great way to get into reading and reading diverse subjects, because of what's in the magazines. I went there looking at the Hugo Boss blue blazer with the crest on it because it was the most pretentious fucking thing in the world that you could think about when you're 17, 18 years old, right?
Yep.
But then got into, reading everyone from Tom Janot to, some of my introduction to David Granger, who was the editor for GQ and Esquire. All these guys got introduced to all of these folks.
Charles Pierce is who I found in Esquire. That was one in particular. I remember that because I found him again over in the social media world. You are not kidding about how rich Vanity Fair was. A rich magazine. My father, we spoke of Dad's. Dad was a magazine, like newspaper reader. Didn't read a lot of books, but man, I got him a subscription. I'm like, Dad, you're gonna love this. He goes, Bob, I just couldn't get past the ads, like, because it was, just pages and pages of the beautiful people. Yeah. And then you would have some really good. So just continue. I didn't mean to you were reaching for names, and I was like, Charles Pierce is one that I remember vividly from reading Esquire.
Paul Ritters, Tom Chiarella. Yeah, no. Pierce, interestingly enough, was doing sports. Was writing about sports for years, and like when I found him again, when he started showing up in social media, and he's really doing politics, and he can write about anything, right?
Essays. He's doing essays, right, about current events beyond just the sports.
So anyway, so David and I kind of start bonding over this whole idea of like, reading GQ, reading Esquire, looking at aspiring to the life that, that the branding was putting forward in many ways. The whole idea about the good life, about, drinking good alcohol, wearing really nice clothing, learning how to present, learning how to be in public and in different environments that made it possible for you to do the thing that you wanted to do, which was find beautiful women and, hang out with cool people and, maybe, in somewhere in there, get a job and make a lot of money. Right. So we do this for years as buddies, like talking about it, reading these magazines. We did other things. We were in a band. We were in a band together for a number of years. And then, fast forward, we're both married. He's got kids. We're talking, Jill and I are starting to talk about having kids. And he comes back to this idea about like, what we should do something with this whole notion of being better guys. It's like, I see at this point, we're starting to work with, we have younger colleagues. We're old enough now that we're in our 30s. Some are actually approaching 40 about this point. And we're old enough now that we have younger colleagues who are asking us questions. Hey, where do I get a decent shirt? How do I tie a tie? How do I tie a bow tie? I've got to go to a formal event. Do I really need to wear a tuxedo? Hey, I really like this young lady. I want to go over to her apartment and cook a meal for her, but I'm not really a good cook. All kinds of stuff like this. Like these sorts of things are popping up on a fairly regular basis. So he's like, why don't we just figure out a way to like kind of capture this stuff somewhere that makes sense for the average guy, for the dude who's not interested in reading about, $25,000 watches and all those different things. How do we figure that out? And then we eventually came up with the idea of Be Better Guys. And so around 2006 is when we started.
Whoa.
Yeah. So
whoa.
Yeah. So 2006, we started doing Be Better Guys. we did it for about 7 years, around 2013 is around the time we ended. But during that time, we got really lucky. The Washington Post, Chris Richards, who writes is it music columnist for the Post, did an article about the website. And all of a sudden we started getting Fox and Friends called us. Was a Man Cow that was a big radio DJ out in the Midwest. He reached out to us. We wound up doing a bunch of radio hits in New York and in Philadelphia and some other places. We eventually wound up getting picked up by Macy's to do sort of like in-store, hey, talk about Be Better Guys with our clothes for this, like a small fashion show, something like that. And we did it here, did in Philadelphia. I think we might have done one or two down in Richmond as well.
Wow.
So this whole idea, so we called the Be Better Guys a guy's guide to getting a life. And the whole idea was none of this stuff is hard, but all of the things that used to exist in society that kind of foisted this upon you in ways you may never appreciate at the time, but military service, people in social clubs, like all these things that require you to learn how to do certain things, how to conduct a meeting, how to present in front of a room full of people, how to tie a tie, polish your shoes, how to go about buying a suit. And how to make sure that it fits well, right? All these little things that kind of happen through different societal norms. Like I said, the military, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, social clubs,
fraternal organizations,
across the board, right?
The all Masons, the Elks, all of these things spreading out beyond just but also business clubs. And like, these are the ways we all learn to navigate the world. Men, right? It was a kind of a foreign thing passed down, at this, what you're talking about, the way you present, which I guess some people could argue is not even a good thing in the first place, right? Like that there is a need to do that. But I think you're telling me you're making the choice. Each person you're talking about here, including yourself, is making a choice to say, hey, I do dig looking good.
Sure.
I dig looking stylish. I dig presenting myself in a manner that is not overtly friendly or casual to people, because for whatever reason, my parents didn't like it, or I find it off-putting, or I just think it's classier. And some aspects of this kind of classy thing is something that I like. Mm-hmm. Do I think it needs to be impaled or, put upon everybody no, but you're talking about the ways in which you as a man learn to navigate the world in a world that you aspired to, that you saw your brother had, your father had, other people. Then as you get into the professional space, and then you mentioned creative space, bands, mm-hmm. like where you are actually saying, I'm cultivating a look. And I've seen your pictures from the 90s, bro. You look like straight out of Central Casting in any number of different, like every time I'll see him. Ahmad Ward's another one. I don't know if you know Ahmad through our mm-hmm. circles, but he's another one when he'll put up. Now, I don't think he's posing in a band. I think you were in a band, but Ahmad, sometimes I'm like, man, I'm telling you, you're like any number of bands that I saw on MTV in the 90s. Like you're, the way that you move, the way that you pose. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there because there is a mystery beyond that when you leave your home to what is the world and how do I navigate it? And DC had to have had you grew up in DC.
Sure.
Yeah. That had to have had a huge influence on the visual style in your mind of what's going around. It is the seat of international power, seat of certainly power here, and people are, I'm assuming it's still a suit and tie culture. It certainly was the last time I was, 10 years ago or so, and I spent a lot of time there.
Yeah, it still is. And, one of the things is it's a very conservative town. It's a very, there's a lot of all the preppy gear you could possibly ever want, right? That is the look, right?
It is.
And the stores that existed around Washington, D.C. cater to that look. in those places, like so many of those places don't even exist anymore. So when I was younger, you know, as a kid, you know, we went to places like Cavaliers Men's Shop and stuff like that, which were really targeted toward urban African American men and women, but African American men. Um, it was a much funkier aesthetic, right? And when you were like 16 years old, you want to be as cool as you can be, right? Um, and as I got older and I started when I went away to college and then came back and transferred to Maryland, and started doing other things, you know, I'll use this memory. There was a friend's wedding, a family friend's wedding, and I was allowed to go get pants and a shirt to wear to the wedding. I had a blue blazer because, you know, if I only had anything else, I didn't have anything else, I had a blue blazer.
Yep.
And I went out and got a pair of I'm going to call them burgundy, but they were probably closer to raspberry. Pants. So we're talking early 80s. So you can imagine what these pants might have looked like. I got those pants. I got a shirt with a collar barely wide enough to get a pencil in, let alone a tie. And I think I bought a tie to go along with it. And I tried on the stuff because my dad wanted to make sure that I had stuff to wear. And I tried it on for him before we went to the wedding. He's like, "What the hell is this? What, where are you going looking like this? No. So I'm flushed because my buddies would have thought I looked like $1,000,000, right? At
You
least
thought you were looking
right?
fly.
Yeah, but the audience was a wedding for some people who were family friends, not me trying to get on the soul train, right? So part of what I remembered from that, and I mentioned this story on numerous occasions, what I remember with that is clothing also speaks to the moment. You know, the thing I'd say about clothes, and I used to tell people this all the time, one of the things is they should have a certain level of urgency for the moment you're in, right? You know, you should look like you are there to be there. You know, that was my thing with clothes, right? You know, I walk in, it's 9:30 in the morning, there's a meeting happening at 10 o'clock. I look like I'm there for a 10 o'clock meeting, right? If it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going out to happy hour and it's going to be on a pier, I'm going to be dressed like I'm going to happy hour looking at a pier. But I am dressing for the moment and I'm dressing for that with that sense of urgency in mind. And I'm going to be out here doing this, and this. I need to be in this kind of gear. And it was understanding that. And like that was the thing to me about Be Better Guys.
Yeah.
I dug. It was like, hey, look, I'm not saying you can't wear a t-shirt. Should you wear a t-shirt when you're supposed to go meet with, you're supposed to go meet with the faculty, the faculty about, maybe something going on with with your grades? Probably not. I might make a different choice. You know, should you plan on wearing, a crew neck sweater and, with a pop collar to your sister's wedding? I would go with a different choice on that, right?
I'll give you a simple one. This isn't even on dressing. I showed up for an interview with a friend. Like, I don't know what I was on my way to do something else. You want to come? I got an interview. Like, nobody told me that was a bad idea. I never did it again, but I told a ton of people. I got another one for you, Brian. I was just thinking about this. One of my mantras over the last couple of years comes from a guy named Jake McNeil, who has a Substack called Creative Hackers that I've been obsessed with for years. And I've hired him a couple of times as a coach, but it is be who the younger you needed. And so, like, as a dad, I'm that way. Yeah, try to be right now as my daughters are transitioning to fully fledged adulthood. Ryan is there. Tyler's just about to. But you're talking about this, right, for your colleagues and your peers and younger guys. I can recall this kid. He was an intern working for me at the History Center. So this would have been 2005, 6, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he shows up on the biggest event day of the year in a shirt and tie, but he hadn't shaved in days. And I just said, "Hey man, I just want to tell you, in the future, an event like this is a shaving day. Like, right? That kid, I wish I could remember his name because I'd shout him out right now, but he found me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn, the most cringiest, worst social media app of all of them. I mean, like at least the cringiest, not worst anymore. But he thanked me, like because I had just sent this sort of little lesson, and I'm guessing probably more than anything, it told him, hey, how I present myself does, and in the moment, does matter. For years, when I would go to board meetings, I dressed in a suit. Everybody else came in their casual stuff. But I was like, for when I was at I don't usually name drop this one, but at ASLH, like I was dressed however I was all the time. But when we went to a board meeting, I was in a suit. When we went to conferences, I was in a suit. I'm now 55 and have come out of the closet as a hippie. And so not that I don't think anybody was all that surprised, but I'm a lot less concerned. I am less concerned about that these days than I was. But I'm with you like 100%. It's like you were being who a younger you needed. You had good models. I mean, your brother was a clothes horse. Your father was they demonstrated it. My dad was not.
Want more stories like this? Subscribe at longlivetheabb.com. Trust me, I'm a doctor.
Yeah, but my dad was an attorney, but like his grandfather owned tobacco farms, right?
Wow.
A dude who wore dungarees and boots, and like he's the person who my dad talks about so often, or God rest his soul, my dad used to talk about so often about like shaping, because it wasn't necessarily what he wore reflected what he did. Like, he worked and owned his own farm. He owned a bunch of properties in town everywhere. When anyone ever saw him, he was in clean jeans, he was in boots that obviously were intended to be worked in, but didn't look like they'd seen a lot of work recently, and driving a truck, right? Because that was what was going to work for the environment that he was in. Like this
dress for the moment. All right. I'm gonna put that out there. I like that. We're gonna put that into the world here. So my whole concept, right, for my show is conversation from the crossroads of Southern music history and culture. And like I represent that crossroads. So wherever I find an intersection or a crossroads with someone, that indeed brings it in here. But one of those crossroads for me, obviously, is being a father, being a girl dad, and then I feel a responsibility to the younger me, if I can frame it that way, when I didn't know better. Same way. I'll be very honest. I feel a responsibility to the voices that I've that have often been muted, in the historical narrative or in boardrooms and those sorts of things, like being better there. We got to wrap up where Be Better Guys ended up. Like, where is it now?
Okay.
Yeah.
So 2006 to 2013 it ran, and in 2013 we basically we shuttered it. We shuttered it. Now you can go to the Internet Archive and find stuff. You can do, if you do a search for Brian Joyner or David Boris Be Better Guys, you will find a bunch of the articles and things that.
Was it just like it ran its course for y'all? Because every creative endeavor runs its course. Well, so not every, but many, especially the side hustles, the ones that pull you constantly are the ones that you're like, talk about this a little bit.
So the long and the short of it was, we got probably close enough to like getting picked up by a larger media entity.
Yep.
We got outreach from a couple of places about possibly having Be Better Guys absorbed into that, and then we would have basically been the editors of Be Better Guys while someone else actually owned it and ran it. And that wasn't something we were necessarily interested in per se, because the money wasn't right, simply put, right? It was
you're doing all the work.
The idea is like, if we're going to do this, it needs to be on a level that, quite frankly, I could quit my job. We still have a house note to make. We got bills to pay.
Yeah.
All those different things. So we hit that point, And I think once it hit that point, we probably spent 2 years kind of tinkering around the edges with it, see if like we could figure out another way to do some things that might be interesting. And I think during that 2 years, it was about the time that literally content, you had to be churning out content every day. So at this point, we both had Twitter feeds, God rest Twitter, both had Twitter feeds. We both had personal blogs that fed into the Be Better Guys website, Facebook page. We were starting to move content between talking about the whole Be Better Guys radio. That kind of content, doing the little videos, doing some other stuff. We were doing enough that we started to see, okay, this is going to have to be a full-time job for somebody. And, it just reached a point where it's like we just couldn't do it. But we probably got pretty damn close to, oh, I see how you can make this happen, right? And there were all kinds of sites out there like Ask Men, that was a big one, but it was a huge conglomerate. Like they had thousands and thousands of articles and tons of content coming in all the time, every day.
Yeah.
And eventually, the thing that happens with so many of these endeavors, right? It got so big they couldn't continue to feed the beast, and eventually it just disappeared. And there were some other websites like that really for a while that filled that kind of general men's knowledge space, but a lot of them became really, really specific. And we just realized that we were really good at the general stuff, and general stuff wasn't going to necessarily get us to the place where we wanted to be. So we decided to say our goodbyes and let Be Better Guys live in the internet forever. So
I'll make a couple comments on this whole piece. One is I know you met you in the latter stages of this, and I recognize you as a fellow traveler in this regard of talking with others and sharing these ideas. It's through the history world and the history historic sites that we know each other the most, but it reflects this wider part of the world that you're talking about. And, in the era you were doing that was not an era I was doing anything publicly. I was watching this whole blog thing happen, the podcast thing sort of take off. And then I remember like, man, I need to do something like that, but I was never ready for it, So for those of y'all who did it and went through that ringer, like, yeah, you put something out in the world that meant something to you and did mean to other people, but sometimes it's just a creative idea has just run its course in your mind. The reason why this season of this show, which is basically everything I'm recording, is a conversation with another person, is because that's what I felt like doing.
Yeah.
But I purposely didn't build a show around other people, because I didn't want to be stuck in that. Well, who's my guest? How do I make it interesting? It's like, so, and what happened to you was, right, when you started, the world was the wild-ish west of, the internet, that everything was possible. When it opened up to that extent, right? What I have seen social media do, and like I mentioned, it did to me, is it decides, well, I'm not giving this to you anymore. Or Google, which is the truth now, I'm not sending you to your website anymore.
No,
right? I'm only going to sell you ads and AI content that I pay for. So if we are dependent on our distribution mechanisms to be through those traditional channels, we're kind of fucked to begin with. And so that's why, like with me, like longlivetheabb.com is a newsletter. I still call it a blog. Feels like a blog, but it's a newsletter. On Substack, you own your subscriber list. You own your content. It can go anywhere you want to. And like Instagram, my Allman Brothers account, man, has like 13,000 people, and I'll post something and 800 people see it. 13,000 followers, and they only show it to 800 people? Like, that makes no sense to me whatsoever as a business strategy, right? Like, but somehow, so like, I'm done. Like, so I would suggest your next creative move, and you are full of them, I know, would be own your shit like you did, own your platform. But even those blogs like you had, readers had to find you. or the RSS feed through the Google Reader that Google decided to just right in the middle of the glory of the blogs, they just canceled the Google Reader. And it was
I remember that
around this same time.
Yeah.
And so
crazy.
Like there were all these people I was, following and learning from. That's how I found Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's how I found Kevin Levin of Civil War Memory from Ta-Nehisi Coates at the Atlantic.
Yeah.
And I'm not nostalgic as an impulse, right? Because I find nostalgia to be a really, really dangerously addictive drug. Case in point, United States of America in this last 10 years or so, but certainly the last 2 or 3. Look, I'm not timely on this. We're recording this particular one in April of 2026. There's a shit show going on outside. Because I'm not doing timely and we're not talking timely stuff, I don't know exactly what's happening by the time I post this. But I imagine we all know what I'm talking about nostalgia, and when it's a dangerous, dangerous drug. But when that internet opened up to those of us in the kind of the unending conversation sphere, the idea that we are here on Earth to have this dialogue, or maybe, I don't know, I believe we are here on Earth to serve others. I will start there.
Okay.
One way that I enjoy experiencing life with others is through the sort of the dialogue and the knowledge process. So that's probably the unending conversation, sharing ideas in good faith. So
can I hop in on that for a second? Because
hell's yeah.
Because I'm thinking about the first couple of times we met, and what I realized was, do you know it was probably a year after we met before I realized, oh, this is what his actual role is here with this. With this. I just assumed you were another individual like me who got pulled into. So, I think we can say for the purposes of for this conversation, AASLH 2016, we're both on the programming committee, we're doing all this stuff. And then I didn't realize we had done the thing. What was that? We'd gone to Detroit. We had done the whole
Pensacola.
We've done Pensacola together. We've done a bunch of different things together. And I was just like, wait a minute. That's who Bob Beatty is? Because every time I talked to you, every time I saw you, it wasn't about, hi, I'm Bob Beatty. I'm the acting director for da, 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 da. It was that conversation. It was like picking up on thread here. We were talking about Albany movement. We were talking about this. We both happened to be at the Motown Museum at the same time. Yeah.
I'm just going to say, one of the pleasures of my life was hearing Brian Joyner sing in the echo chamber at Motown Records in 2015 or 16. I don't remember when it was, but the echo chamber, he stood underneath it and sang. I don't know how many people were in that room. In fact, at the time, Brian, I don't even think I knew it was you.
Yeah.
So y'all don't even know, but this guy has got some beautiful pipes. Just please continue. I just want to give you some love because it was cool.
Well, it was amazing being there, and then we show up at the first meeting of the whole group, and you were like, you guys gotta hear this guy sing. And I was like, I do not want to sing in front of this room full of people.
That was it. I did do that to you. I remember now.
I don't want to do this. It was cool to do with and I was like, I don't want to, because I think I have a decent voice, and I've performed and I've recorded, so I know people obviously think my voice is good enough they want to let me stand in front of a mic. But I always feel like I'm putting people out there listen to me sit here.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, so, that wasn't fair. I will say that wasn't very fair to me.
That's okay. But that was the point. By the time we moved through all that, I was like, oh, that's who he is? I was like, right. Yeah.
I like that. And, that is, it certainly was my job, but it was also, as it's just my personality too. Mike Nesmith of the Monkees has this great book, I think it's Infinite Thursday. So I always thought it was Infinite Tuesday, but either way. But he constantly refers to all his projects as his different bands. Uh-huh. And for you, like this guy, David, you've been in an actual musical band with him, and then you were in a band with him and this woman, that helped you get the show. And, we've been in various bands, usually one-off situations where we jam together about this or that. So here's what I want to segue over to the music side for a second. Okay. And I played your walk-up song for me, the Bad Brains band in DC. Could have been anything from Ian MacKaye and Discord Records, Minor Threat. That was my band. But it's go-go that really defines DC go-go. And I want to know, are you cool? Are you cool to sort of give me a little, like, you got some lesson in go-go and like what it is? It's funk, but it's got a very particular rhythm. Doing Debut, I did not realize Debut is a go-go song. So y'all all know that song from the 80s. Slim Charles from The Wire.
Yep.
Whose name is Anwan Glover, has been in a very famous go-go band his entire life.
Yep.
But it's a unique sound to the district. It is really didn't get that far away from DC as a sound. So let's go. DC is just loaded with good music. I got the punk rock side in me from that for sure.
Sure.
The go-go side is the rhythm and blues adaptation of funk. So I'm going to pause.
So here's the
I gave you all my go-go knowledge and preference for you and Charles. I haven't mentioned Charles Brown, right? Chuck Brown, thank you.
Yeah.
He is also another. I haven't mentioned him. I know he's the saint of it, but I've got very little knowledge. Wanted to just set you up to say, help a brother out.
No, you've teed it up.
That DC sound.
You teed it up well. So the story goes that Chuck Brown, playing with his band, Soul Searchers, and other bands, used to play at these dance halls. And the thing about a dance hall is you want to keep people on the dance floor, you want them moving, you want them out there having a good time, you want to encourage them to stay around. So when you do your traditional 3.5-minute song, you do 8 or 9 of the songs, maybe 15 of those songs, take a break, come back. What happens is you start to lose people in those breaks, right? People go out for a cigarette, maybe they decide to go to another place, maybe they're not really feeling the band that much, maybe it's too early. I come here to set up and go somewhere else. The idea was that so Chuck Brown started using the breaks in songs, the bridges, extending the bridges, extending, different pieces and turning that into essentially a loop, right? And those extended breaks would then turn into these jams in and of themselves. And what that did, it kept people out on the floor. It kept people moving. It kept people engaged. And then after a while, you start to take a song, you take a snippet of a song and use that as the intro. And then the rest of the song is the break. So Chuck Brown is one of these guys who was an incredible guitarist, arranger. He, not just jazz, R&B, all that stuff. It had a great ear for music. It had a great ear, and it had a great eye for talent. So he starts bringing in all of these folks to play with them, and they start playing these very, very long, extended breaks, and percussion becomes a very heavy part of it, right? So you bring it in, congas and timbales and all these other things, and rotatoms. So if you grew up in Washington, D.C. during the 80s, particularly if you grew up in Black Washington in the 80s, the chances are if you were not in a go-go band in your neighborhood, you knew someone who was in a go-go band. So, and it didn't really matter what instrument you played. I can tell you that because me and a few of my friends who played clarinet were in go-go bands. There'd be one person who knew how to play a stringed instrument, and that's all you needed, right?
Wow.
There was always a drummer. There were ample percussionists, and then you got the rappers, right? And not rap the way we think about with hip hop, but really truly like MCs, people who are just toasting to just keep the music progressing, right? And then after a while, they start developing their own style. They start developing their own cadence, and they start to turn some of these, extended, back and forth with the audience into actual lyrics. So you mentioned Chuck Brown. We talked about Chuck. And so my favorite band growing up was Trouble Funk. And Trouble Funk wound up getting a deal with Island Records, like early 80s, a bunch of bands the the record labels are like, this go-go thing in DC is kind of interesting. We got to figure out what to do with it.
Yeah.
So it's like we want to harness it before someone else does, right? So Trouble got a big record deal. I think EU did because they did the song "The Butt" for School Days Spike Lee joint. But prior to that, the only real go-go songs that people knew were the Chuck Brown songs. So he did "Bustin' Loose." I think it hit the R&B top 5 in '78, something like that.
You just keep talking. Yeah, because I've got it up.
Yeah. Bust and Lose, and then there's Money. I need the money. I need the money, money, money. That one hit. That one made charted on the R&B charts. And those two songs wound up, and they sound like traditional R&B sounds with that go-go percussion and swing and long extended break feel in them. They feel like go-go songs, but they're definitely traditionally set up, verse, verse, chorus, verse, verse, chorus, verse, verse, bridge, chorus, the sort of thing. For the most part. But like, if you wanted to hear go-go, you wanted to go to like some place like Cherries. You wanted to go to Crystal Skate. There's a skating rink not far from my house, and they used to do live go-go shows there. I went to Oxon Hill Senior High School. One of the other nearby high schools was Friendly High School, and there was a fire at Friendly years ago. And they had an annex where they like housed some of the students and like had a gym and some other stuff to like be able to do stuff. Friendly Annex was the place I probably saw more go-go bands than anyone. I saw Trouble, I saw EU, local from my community, not in my direct neighborhood, but in the immediate community. Prophecy, huge band for a number of years. Probably saw, who else did I see there? Do you see Air Raid, Reds and the Boys, Petworth. I live in the neighborhood I live in is Petworth in Washington, D.C. There was a Petworth band that was here, Junkyard Band. Get back to Anwan Glover. Junkyard. I mean, all these bands, they play all around the city. And then there was a point where if you were bringing an act into DC, they were going to play, say they were going to play the Capitol Center back when it was open. It used to be over in Landover, Maryland. We'll play one of the big venues. And you were bringing an R&B or a hip-hop act, something like that, you had to have a go-go band open. Or else people,
because that is what would draw.
Or else people wouldn't come.
DC sound, DC in that area.
Mm-hmm.
That's how George Clinton and P-Funk made music also, although that,
Mm-hmm.
it was lots of people, everybody doing their talents, right? I think down to the DJs, the dub DJs in down in Jamaica,
Mm-hmm.
those guys, as you were explaining the MC style, that was some of the MC style before we got into the hip hop stuff now, but more of that keeping the party rolling. Jazz in New Orleans, there's so much. Of course, jazz is the beginning. It's the alpha and the omega of American music, of all popular music, but New Orleans in particular, the way they made music was, these are the instruments that we have. This is what we have, and
Mm-hmm.
they have a particular, funky beat as well. It's very New Orleans, very Swans, very different. I'm just struck though by this kind of collective music making. And in terms of what you're talking about with go-go, how easy it was to get involved. It was simply,
I mean,
hey, I can stand in this room, and if I can play tap a beat, I could be a part of this band or whatever. Or,
Yeah. I mean, highly syncopated percussion.
Yep.
And rhythms. So there are people out there who be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Actually, you do. You do. If you listen to Grace Jones in the late 80s, you heard Slaves to the Rhythm. All that's a go-go band. Those are go-go bands. If you heard,
that's a go-go, that's a whole
rare
beat, yes?
That's Rare Essence. Literally, that's Rare Essence playing behind her. If you listen to, if you heard Salt and Pepper, a lot of the rhythm beats in there were go-go beats.
You mentioned like the beats are so good, and it's the bridge. The Beatles called it the middle eight. it's the part in the song that is different. It's the third melody that gets you between the chorus and the verse, kind of takes you home. They call it the bridge.
Yeah.
You'll hear James Brown call for the bridge. In fact, on Zeppelin, he's calling for the bridge. Is it in the crunge? And has anyone seen the bridge? Where's that confounded bridge? Because they don't have a bridge. But the bridge is where go-go kind of launches off into this. We're going to hang here. Rhythm for a short period of time repeated, that ends up in hip hop with people who don't have instruments but have recording capabilities. That ends up as the loops. If you want to think about, I'm not educating you, Brian, either, but the loop in Walk This Way.
Yeah,
that's probably one of the more famous ones, right? Took a rock beat, literally a rock record, Walk This Way by Aerosmith, and created a beat out of it. Well, and so we're talking these tangents were like essential for keeping people on the dance floor, giving the band a chance to just go off and have a damn good time. I mean, these must have just been outstanding. So any music that calls itself go-go just feels fun.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, as a kid, the shows were amazing, right? So everyone has their favorite band. You go see your favorite band. You're listening for certain songs because there are songs. I mean, I'm sitting there describing these infinite loop grooves, but there are songs. They do have structure to them. It's how the songs are structured, and they're structured around the idea that the drum and percussion are the primary. Those are what drives everything, right? And everything else is in service. All the other instruments tend to be in service to that, except for the horns, because you always had to have a horn section. Not just a horn. You had to have horns. Invariably, you had at least one trumpet, possibly two. Someone played trombone. There's always a saxophone. Like I said, me and some friends, we play clarinet and go-go bands, whatever. But you had a horn section because you had the call and response. If you had the call and response.
That's the other part of it. That crucial part of this is the call and response. Also a crucial part of the African-American, not just living tradition, but certainly musical tradition and worship tradition as well, right?
Indeed. So
interesting.
If I think about go-go and I think about hearing it, and you point out the fact that it's a fairly specific to Washington D.C. DMV. There's some places like it would show up, like Texas for some reason or another had a big go-go scene. I have no idea why, but I know kids from Texas who like, oh yeah, we love go-go here. But one of the things about go-go to me is that when you drop it in, like you drop it into someone else's music, there's a place for it. There's a place for it. Like you listen to, I was thinking about Jill Scott just released a new album, and I went back to listen to her first album, Who's Jill Scott Again? And of course, the song on there that like resonated with me, not the big song, one that resonated with me was the song It's Love. But that's a go-go beat. Like the producer, who I think she might have been involved with at the time, doesn't matter, was from DC. So it's a go-go break that they use to open up the song. It's like just a simple keyboard vamp, dun, 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 and then underneath it they bring in the drums and the percussion, and at that point you just and that's everything is bouncing off of that. She's bouncing off that. The vocals, all the horns are bouncing off of that. The keyboard is bouncing off of that. That is the engine. That is the thing that is driving it. And once you lock that in, you can move the world.
I want to pause on this point, and I want to pivot to music and the civil rights movement, but not without mentioning Fela. That was the other one that I kind of wanted to mention, was that Afro. It feels, but all of this feels very Afro beat inspired, and vice versa. And we're not going to get into Fela, but we will get into him at some point when and if you're ready. I got to be a little more prepared, but I have done some homework there with him. I find it's just phenomenal. But it's that idea of the steady, constant beat. And, I say this a lot, and I say, like that there are two cultures that I have encountered in the world for whom the rhythm, the 4/4 beat is essential. The African culture / African American, and the Native American / American Indian / First Peoples culture. It's not lost on me, right? That's where rhythm joins when it joins Western music, that's where the rhythm comes in. And you watch native ceremonies with the beat, we know Africans were forbidden to play drums when they came to America when they came to America as enslaved and then enslaved, but we have this particular connection that I want to bring out, which is you helped reframe a critical moment in the civil rights movement, which was in Albany, Georgia. And Albany, the music, and Bernice Johnson Regan, Sweet Honey and the Rock had a role here. And so I'm going to make a segue to say, sure. We had Dr. Regan at AASLH. Now it was 18 years ago. The first conference I organized, she spoke in Rochester. And she would not allow us to record it, nor allow us to print her remarks. But, I was in awe, right? This is a hero. This is someone who's faced it. For everybody's benefit, 62, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference decides to go to Albany, Georgia to protest. In all cases, y'all, during the civil rights movement, the choices of cities to put efforts behind were because of many, many, many reasons. But one of those being, we're hoping we're going to get a reaction somehow from the locals that will get more influence for our cause, more attention for our cause. The idea of civil disobedience and nonviolent protest. That's exactly what it is. Problem is, by the time the SCLC gets to Albany, we're going to let Brian talk about this, sort of prepped for this. I don't exactly know what happened, but the outgrowth that I know well, what follows, and I had Ahmad Ward on the show already, Brian, and we talked a lot about Birmingham. The very famous summer in Birmingham, Project C, it was called, when Fred Shuttlesworth said to Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy, it's time to come to Birmingham. Bull Connor is not going to stand down. And y'all, you've seen it. The fire hoses, we've seen the police dogs. They arrested children. The end of that summer was the bombing at the 16th Street Baptist Church, assassination of 4 little girls whose only crime was being Black and being at a church. Albany was the middle ground here between some very good successes that the SCLC had been having, and it was at the time and for a long time considered one of King's great failures as a leader of the movement. So Brian spoke at a conference, fast forward to, I think this was 2011, maybe 2012. And it really changed my view of that. And again, no history is as easy as how you distill it. In a history book, Albany is a blip and a non-successful thing, but it is lived experience. In this lived experience of the civil rights movement, it as well was critical. And the final piece I'll say, Brian, is the music part of it, because I know they spent, and Dr. Regan in particular, they've documented the songs that they sang in jail. They've talked about it. I can't remember if we have video of them in jail singing, but I just, because we've been talking about music, I want to keep that kind of at the forefront as you spill this tale.
Sure. So I think one of the things that when we were having this conversation in Pensacola, and it was around the 50th anniversary of the Albany movement. And let me just first say, I am not a civil rights historian, but I did do a little bit to get up to speed on it, obviously, since I suggested the idea. So it was like, hey, we should talk about this. Now let me go figure out what the hell it is I'm actually going to talk about. But before I go any further, Marna Watson, who was a PhD student at University of Florida, was amazing on that panel. Bill Austin, also amazing, and Jenny Syriac, who was with the Georgia SHPO, was there, and they were really, really, really key in understanding the context of Georgia in this conversation, which I thought was very interesting for this. So
yeah, because none of this happens in a vacuum, y'all.
None of it happens in a vacuum.
Like you have governors in Georgia, you have a sheriff chief of police, probably the education commissioner, and all these people with money that are pushing all of these people all around. You got presidents and senators and congress people. Like, remembering it, history is it's a big complex animal. So they gave context to Georgia. Forgot about that, actually. So thanks for the shout out to our colleagues.
And to me, that was the thing, like, that was really, really, really great about that discussion. So long story short on this is that Albany comes across as a failure for SCLC, but it is not a failure in regard to the fact that a year after SCLC comes in, they come in the fall. They come in to work with the folks who are already on the ground there. C.W. King, who is not related to Dr. King. Others are been working on the ground, and they're trying to get full segregation of the city, not partial segregation, not for just transportation
integration. They want full integration.
They want full integration, not desegregation. But
on the ground, they have decided we're going full board. We don't want partial nothing. We want
full integration into the city. Is what they're asking for, and they're pushing really hard. So they're there with SNCC. SNCC comes in.
Southern Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Correct. So that's Cordell Regan, Charles Sherrod, Charles Jones. They come and start working with the folks on the ground in Albany. SCLC then comes in a little bit later, and there's tension, right? There's tension between the two organizations.
The Black and because the SCLC are more. I mean, these are Black pastors.
These are the
leadership conference, the ones who have always been in charge.
So let's talk about this in the context of the conversation I was talking about with clothing, right? These are the respectability politics people, right? SCLC. SNCC are the folks who they're John Lewis. We want our freedom. We want it now. These are different dynamics that ultimately wind up playing out in what happens, by the time we get to 1968 or so, post King, and with Stokely Carmichael and all these folks being like, "Hey, this is not working. We got to go a different way," right? So
that's where Black Power and
the whole
Black
separatism, Black Power movement. That's how all that comes into being as a result of this, right? So Albany is this place where you've got a couple of different competing factions trying to figure out how to go about one wanting desegregation of a certain section of society, the other wanting full integration into society. And for SCLC, for all those folks who had a very defined way that they went about doing it, they wanted to go about, creating a situation where there was going to be a confrontation. And I forget what the sheriff's name is, but the sheriff in that town recognized he'd done his homework, and he recognized that that SCLC was going to force a reaction, and he went out of his way to be extremely polite. Hey, let's have a conversation. Let's have meetings. Did not arrest them, and when they did have to arrest people, did not keep people in Albany, so people weren't able to go see the political prisoners right there in town. They actually did this thing where they moved them away from where the actual action was, so you weren't getting the response you wanted. So you've now got one group who says the way you were going about doing this isn't working, and you've now undercut what we have been doing. The other group saying that no, we've had success in other places. What do you all know? Lori Pritchett, that's what the chief of police of the town of Albany was named, Lori Pritchett. So they're at odds with each other, and at the same time all this is happening, you got young people in the street who are trying to force some sort of change to take place. And from that, you come up with a group, including Bernice Johnson, later Bernice Johnson Reagan, of the Freedom Singers, who are singing songs that sound a lot like gospel hymns. Some of them are.
They are, yes, right.
The lyrics get modified, and they're singing and they're bringing this aspect into the protest as a way of, as a means of protest in and of itself, because the songs, once people catch the lyrics, they're familiar enough that you can suddenly start moving crowds of people to participating in this, and giving voice to their cause.
Literally giving voice. That's
Yes.
a great, I mean, I don't know if you intentionally use that turn of phrase, but I think that is a fantastic, music is a very, very powerful unifying force. You know, like the music that I gravitate toward is the kind of music that is communally, you know, performed. It's a with and for. It is a call and response, even if even if it's a call is a guitar lick and a response is, holy shit, did you just hear that, right? But it is still meant to be this kind of participatory give and take. And like you say, did they send them down specifically to like was that do you know, maybe you don't, or did they just say we should start?
I want to say, and this is where my history, my civil,
where I'm pushing you outside of your,
well, this is where my civil rights history falls
expertise.
down. If I'm not mistaken, the Freedom Singers were students from Albany State.
Okay.
So
she was, I'm looking at Wikipedia, which is a fantastic source. I'm going to say I brook very little Wikipedia criticism as a place to go and check your sources. And it says, yeah, it was an active part. She was a member of the Freedom Singers organized by SNCC, for which she also served as coordinating field secretary.
SNCC organized Albany State's college students and had them be the ones to test a lot of the different laws to try to force for desegregation ultimately. And the singing becomes a way of moving people and motivating people.
Yeah.
And so the group, the Freedom Singers as we know them, this idea of this organized group that is now singing as part of their, I'm going to use this phrase, pardon me for those who might be offended, civil rights ministry, right? They're formed in Albany, Georgia. They start there. This is the first time they become an organized body that they're like, oh, we're going to be doing this, and this is now part of what we'll be adopting into the movement. This is part of what SNCC brought. So it's an amazing, it's this amazing amalgamation of things that happen, and what so many, at least in the historical narrative, was a failed attempt in the civil rights movement, except by like September 1963. All the discriminatory laws and segregationist laws in the city of Albany off the books. They win.
So, here we are as an example, and this is this is me and my own journey with a subject I know extremely well. Like Brian and I both probably know about the same amount about the civil rights movement. He's probably a little deeper in some areas than I am, and vice versa. But this is not something that I come to kind of lightly. And, my understanding of Albany was changed by a reinterpretation. I'm going to use those words, right? Because there's this pejorative against historians and revisionist and this or that. Well, shit, man, what are we doing other than just looking at the data and thinking about it differently constantly? If you don't do that, then I'm not sure, as a thinking person, that's what we part of the compact. I think the social compact, at least it is to me. Now this is
myth making though, right? So part of the reason why it's viewed in the lens of, through the lens in which it is that we've made the decision that the civil rights movement, the success of the civil rights movement, was basically dependent upon Dr. King and those around him.
Right. That was the prevailing narrative.
That is the narrative that we all understood to be the case. This is what we have been told. This is what's been beaten into our skull. Look, let's be clear. This is why we have a Martin Luther King Day.
Yes. Which in many ways represents, that day does represent the aspirations of millions of African Americans.
It
It's sort
should.
of
I
like
agree.
Columbus Day
Yeah.
seems to have, I watched The Sopranos when they fought against Columbus Day. Same sort of deal. It was a sort of a civic holiday. Look, our people are important too. And you are correct, sir. It should. Thank you. I don't want to lose that little thing. That's what that is, right?
And that's just it, right? I mean, all right, I'm gonna go a little bit far afield here, and you can reel me back in whenever you're ready. There are no perfect vessels. What makes the civil rights movement is all the things that go in there, not the messenger.
Right.
The messenger is important. The messenger gets people to pay attention, right? But there are no perfect vessels, so therefore the messenger should not be the thing that we tie the most importance to. It should be the message. And I think one of the lessons of Albany is that if the message is integration, getting all the segregation laws off of the books to try to get to a level playing field for everybody is the most important thing. How we get there should not matter. But because we had tied the message and the messenger as it relates to civil rights so tightly in our historical narrative, if it didn't happen under Dr. King, it must have been a failure.
Or somehow less important or
Less
whatnot.
important.
Yeah. And, that's interesting. It was the SCLC's failure, right? Because they did not bring any confrontation. And the reason they didn't is because Pritchett
Yeah.
was he was prepared. He was not going to take the bait. And there has been, you can find this throughout stories throughout the South, right? Orlando had a campaign called What's Black and White and Friendly All Over around this same time, right? To say and I'm going to say the time I spent there trying to dig about civil rights movement, it's a very there's not a lot there. And the one person that I was really hoping to talk to, there was a couple, none of them would speak. The Father Pinder was the Black Episcopal priest from the Bahamas. And I interviewed him. I just couldn't, he what it was he didn't trust me, I wasn't that. Sadly, I don't know that anybody interviewed him, because any town that promotes itself as black and white and friendly all over during the civil rights movement is hiding some serious shit underneath the surface. You know what I mean? I think it's fascinating when you look at Albany in all these little ways, right? Like the Albany leaders, the Albany community got what they sought out to do. Now, the civil rights movement was a collection of individual activities, sometimes formed together into some, different groups came together, and Birmingham, I think, was also SNCC, was it not? The Southern the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and SCLC did the Birmingham to the Selma to Birmingham march and the voting stuff. But there's, in Florida, for example, Harry T. Moore was founding the NAACP in the 40s before he was assassinated there, and started his own efforts. There was in Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, there was a bus boycott that the students did. The sit-in movement begins in Greensboro A&T students.
North Carolina.
Yes, Greensboro, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Greensboro A&T, aren't they? Greensboro, I think. But anyway, four
North
college
Carolina
students.
A&T is a school there, and there's
North Carolina
it's now
A&T,
North Carolina, and there's University of North Carolina Greensboro there now.
UNC Greensboro. Thank you for the correction again. So it's called North Carolina A&T.
Yep.
But they start the sit-in movement, and then what happens is these movements all become subsumed into the greater sort of fight for civil rights. It results in the Civil Rights Act 1965, ultimately the Voting Rights Act of 1960. I'm sorry, Civil Rights Act 64, Voting Rights Act of 1965. I always say, we'll just get to the King thing real quick. And this came up in my discussion with Ahmad. Mm-hmm. Fred Shuttlesworth is the one male civil rights leader I met. I met Elizabeth Cotton. I met Bernice Johnson Reagan. I met several of the Little Rock Nine, but Shuttlesworth is the one. And I mean, that guy, it's just a hero, 5'0" nothing,
Yeah.
this bravest man I ever met. I call him that. I have a post about it and everything else. But, Shuttlesworth was not the orator the king was. He spoke at the March on Washington. It wasn't strong, like it's not a memorable thing. And, he was in the hospital when they made the deal to stop the protests in Birmingham. So he missed Birmingham had been his entire fight from 1952 when he founds the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. And yet, when it's time for the moment, King gets the success. Yeah. And that wasn't intention. I don't know that was necessarily intentional, but it goes back to what you said, which is we do tend to say this one guy is indicative of all of the aspirations of Black America during the civil rights movement and continuing. I'm, like that, his mythos and importance in the Black community is undeniable, indisputable, but it does tend to overshadow the efforts of Bernice Johnson Reagan, Fred Shuttlesworth, frankly, Elizabeth Cotton, and some others. Let's move to this. So you're from DC.
Mm-hmm.
We call it y'all call it the DMV, which is the District, Maryland, Virginia, this sort of area there. DC was carved out of those three states, I believe, as a bit of a deal to keep the power center kind of not in any one state. It's its own animal, but it straddles the South and in a lot of ways has a lot of Southern isms, I guess, but it's really not the South. I don't think you would consider yourself a Southern.
I would argue differently.
Okay, go for it, please.
I would argue differently. So from a sheer geographic point of view, it is most definitely the South. We sit below the Mason-Dixon line.
Yes, okay.
Okay. So geographically, we're the South.
I guess I'm going culturally and psychographically. So thank you for that little clarification. Because all three of those, Virginia and Maryland, are all three Southern. I would consider those two considered Southern states.
So culturally, I mean, keep in mind that the Washington that you came to as a young man and spent time in, and then, as a professional, that Washington's only about 45, 50 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, up until early 60s, I take that back. I would say, I'm trying to think exactly when. So Home Rule happens in 1961. I'm sorry, Washington gets to vote for its own mayor in 1961. Home Rule happens in 73. So somewhere between there is when we stop being a sleepy little segregated Southern town.
Okay.
So the federal government growing creates the federal district of Washington. But the outer line areas they're filled with nothing but folks coming from the South looking for work, Black, white, and otherwise. This town used to roll up at 7:30 at night. For the most part, unless you knew where to go, it still is an extremely segregated city. I live in a neighborhood that happens to be fairly diverse, but I can trace from when Jill and I bought the house in 2003 till now. There's still only 3 white families on my street. Most of the people who own houses on my street, that's third generation, if not more, African American.
Yeah.
I live in Northwest Washington, D.C. I live in the bigger part of Northwest Washington, D.C. I live right near 16th Street, not very far from 16th Street. I'm not in some secluded corner of the city. You go around the neighborhood now. I mean, you can see the demographic change that's happened. The schools that my kids go to, you can see the demographic change. But huge portions of the city were highly segregated, even within wards. So there are 8 wards in the city. Ward 6, 7, and 8, overwhelmingly African American. Ward 4 is a mix, and it borders 16th Street. It's like it's like on the eastern portion of 16th Street. Ward 4 runs up and down there. Ward 3, overwhelmingly not people of color, not diverse. Ward 2, overwhelmingly not people of color, not diverse. Ward 1, a little bit more diversity. But you look at this town, and like it's made up of all the different parts of the South that came here either looking for an opportunity, looking for the DC used to have a fair amount of industry. It doesn't as much anymore. The industry now is paper, or digital ink, as it were. So
vomit.
Yeah, exactly.
Blather. That's what I'm going to.
Exactly. Right. You're absolutely right. But there used to be industry. There were, the areas that are highly populated and fairly affluent suburbs. 50 years ago, tobacco land. 50 years ago, active farmland. Not just like, a farm darted here and here. No, active farmland. I remember being a kid over in Prince George's County, so that just east and south of the city. The community I grew up with, this playing community, probably got put in sometime in the late 50s, early 60s. About the same time that the population in Prince George's County started to change over. People who had come, so you had the wave of people who came here for jobs during the war effort, when World War II. Federal government expands, people stay. You have more housing need. The suburbs start growing up. These tobacco farms, these other farms, corn, stuff like that, start to disappear. Housing developments go in. Those developments primarily serving the federal government, but as the federal government is changing its demographics, its workplace, those housing developments start to change. And the white flight that you see in suburbs all around the United States happens here too. And it happens in a way that is fairly predictable. So in the history of Washington, you have poor folks on the South who would come in and live in places like Anacostia, and they were Italian, they were Jewish, they were poor whites from Appalachia. And then eventually they start getting into federal jobs, they start getting better jobs. And then around that same time, Southern Blacks are coming in, trying to take some of those industrial jobs that are now opening up. Those people move a little bit further north and a little bit further west. And that happens out in the suburbs as well. All that basically shifts. So Montgomery County, which is for the longest time one of the top 5 richest counties in the United States, Loudoun County in Virginia, one of the top 10 richest counties in the United States. All these big counties out west of the city suddenly become populated with all the folks who used to live, maybe are 2 generations removed from living in Anacostia, but as the South's demographics have changed, as the United States South continues to populate Washington, D.C., these folks who are no longer view themselves as Southern, but without question, the Southern rooted, are moving further and further to these places.
Okay. So, do you consider yourself a Southerner?
It would be hypocritical for me not to. I do recognize that DC is a weird place, right, in that regard. But my daddy's from North Carolina, my mom is from Oklahoma. And her family's from Tennessee, through Mississippi. So I can't claim New England, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, but you just said though, like the district is, and Ian MacKay has talked about this from, Minor Threat and Fugazi, he lived this same era. I think he was born in 61, 62, right? As the Cold War really truly ramps up the federal government, the military industrial complex, Vietnam era, and the city, the way he describes it. Henry Rollins is the same way. These are my punk rock heroes. We didn't even talk about the Bad Brains Do you have any experience with the Bad Brains and punk rock scene in DC? Can I get that before we get out the door, or am I pushing you?
No. So I'm not a huge punk guy, but like I grew up listening to alternative music. I grew up listening to punk.
Did you know that band? Like, were they like, did you guys hear these freaking amazing black guys playing punk rock music kind of thing with the Bad Brains?
So here's the thing.
I know they took off.
I know, but hang on a second. Bad Brains used to play with Trouble Funk and EU and all those bands. They used to play in the same clubs.
Yeah.
Fugazi and all those guys a lot of those folks played in the same clubs, ran in the same circles, ran in the same scenes. The go-go movement and the punk movement literally were side by side in Washington, D.C. And they played in a lot of the same clubs, a lot of the same people overlapped. I have seen, so here's my Bad Brains story. This is like in the early 90s. Me and my buddy David, Chuck Robert, Mike Peters, my buddy Todd, who's managing the band and DJing with us occasionally. We're at a recording studio, which is also a rehearsal space called One World. And One World, Dan Parker runs One World, and he's from this area, went to Gonzaga High School. It's his recording space, and a dude who we used to hang out with a great deal, really fascinating guy. Knowledge Shabazz is the name he goes by. And Knowledge had this project called Sounds of Southeast. And so it was a bunch of bands who fancied themselves to be somewhat heavier hitters. My band at the time was called Congregation One. We thought we wanted to be some combination of Fishbone and Living Color.
Okay.
We were probably closer to the Spin Doctors, but it was a fun time.
Band that did extremely well. And by the way, he is an amazing follow on the Threads app. Chris, the lead singer of Spin Doctors.
Yeah, I'll have to check him out. So we're there, and we had asked to record on the project. So we're putting together our song, and there's this dude in the other room, and he keeps sticking his head in, like while we're recording and stuff like that. And like we knew that Dr. No used to hang out, the guitarist for Bad Brains used to kind of come by and hang out every now and then. And the dude in another group who used to every now and then sit in with Bad Brains. God rest his soul, David. I can't remember his last name right now. He passed, unfortunately, like 20 years ago. I mean, these are like serious players. Serious players. So we knew like some of these cats used to like flow through, like a couple of the bands who practiced there, CI, and a couple of others who were reggae bands. They used to every now and then they hit with HR, hit with the brother Earl, the whole Ross influence associated with Bad Brains. So this dude keeps sticking his head in, and we're like, what's this? Like, what's up with him? He's looking kind of like a little skittish and everything. Wasn't paying attention. Get to finish with the recording, and then Dan comes out and he's just like, "Yeah, we listened to the roughs of it. It's like, all right, this is going to be okay." He's like, "Yeah, man, I got to tell you, HR really loved your stuff." I'm like, "Excuse me, what?" He's like, "HR really loved it." It's like, "Hey, when was HR here?" He said he was in the other room. I'm
that scroungy looking guy kept poking his head in. That was the man.
I'm like, that was HR. Like, I hadn't seen him with the full Rasta beard. Like, he'd had the dreads last time I saw him, but like they weren't as distinct. And
that's crazy.
He was in transition, shall we say, at the time. Yeah. Getting his life back together. But I was like, whoa. I mean,
that is like being visited by God during a studio there, and
it was a surreal experience. It was.
I can't tell you, so we didn't need to go deep into punk rock. I had to mention it. DC punk rock was my jam. Discord Records, and then
Minor Threat, Highback Llamas.
Minor Threat was the one, and then honestly, the Faith, which I'm passing some records down to my kids, or Faith, but his son, his buddy, his brother Alex, but the Bad Brains were the ones when Eye Against Eye came out. That was I mean I wore it out, and I'm going to be honest. I remember at the record store looking through, and I was like, my buddy was like, "Oh my God, they're black," because no black people played rock that hard. And Living Color comes out a little bit after that, and we all knew Jimmy, like Jimi Hendrix, but in that era, it was all the more R&B stuff and this or that. Prince wasn't playing any rock or guitar, and those guys were slaying it.
Well,
Still to this day, one of my favorite bands ever, the Bad Brains.
Yeah, Bad Brains is amazing because, I mean, Henry Rollins doesn't happen if it's not for Bad Brains, right?
Yeah. I don't think. I mean, Minor Threat may have still happened, but no, they are so important to that era. Every band of the punk rock era speaks of them with such high regard. And the thing about them is
those bands were
virtuoso musicians too. Like they're not just cranking out. They're not the Ramones. Like they are playing some intricate stuff.
So I mean, their history, like they used to do like Mahavishnu orchestra style jazz and stuff like that. That's what they started doing, and then got into the punk scene in DC, and were just took it harder and harder and harder. And by the time I guess I comes out, I don't even know if they're doing punk anymore. At that point, they're doing straight speed metal.
Yeah, it's that record, like in hindsight, to me, it's a hardcore record, but in hindsight, when you compare it to their first two records, it is absolutely more it's definitely metal produced as well. Yeah. Between that and Quickness were very much, it was the same sound, but different. But, when I talk, I just did an interview earlier this week with somebody on classical music and the Allman Brothers and the dynamics of the Allman Brothers and this symphonic quality to it. And I love dynamics. And that's what Bad Brains does really well. And a lot of hardcore punk from DC would do is that stop and you get that chunk, 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 that kind of thing. And it go, chunk, 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 chunk. Like, I mean, 40 years later, I still write music like that when I play, it impacted me so much. Listen, I'm going to have to figure out how to wrap up this last little bit in editing. Brian, thank you, dude, for being at the Crossroads. Man, I've had such a blast. I knew I would. I was looking forward to it. I'll let you know when this one goes up.
Okay.